The first mistake they made was thinking the forest would hide them. The second was believing an old man alone meant an easy target. The Douglas fir canopy overhead filtered the afternoon light into scattered coins of gold on the forest floor. Somewhere in the distance a raven called out, its voice swallowed by the density of 10,000 trees. The air tasted like pine resin and coming rain. This was the kind of wilderness that made city boys nervous, the kind where your cell phone was just an expensive paperweight and the nearest sheriff was a 2-hour drive on logging roads that hadn't seen maintenance since the Clinton administration. He'd been tracking the elk for 3 hours when he found the first boot print, wrong tread pattern, too deep. Someone carrying weight they weren't used to, the kind of weight that came in duffel bags and made men stupid. His name didn't matter anymore. Most folks around these parts just called him the Old Man, if they called him anything at all. He lived in a cabin 17 miles from the nearest paved road, off a grid that had never reached this far into the Cascade Range anyway. Social security checks came to a P.O. box he visited once a month. The rest of the time he was a ghost, just the way he liked it. But these boot prints weren't from hikers. Hikers stayed on trails. These tracks cut straight through dense undergrowth, moving with purpose toward something specific. He knelt, touching the compressed earth, fresh, maybe an hour old. 5 men, possibly 6, all moving fast, which meant they were either running from something or toward it. The Remington 700 across his back was loaded with 308 Winchester rounds. Good for elk. Better for men who thought the wilderness was empty. He'd carried variations of this weapon through jungles that made this forest look like a garden, through deserts where the sun could cook you from the inside out, through mountains where the air was so thin you had to budget your breaths like currency. The rifle was a tool, nothing more, nothing less. He followed the tracks for another quarter mile before he smelled it, diesel fuel and something chemical. Wrong smells for this deep in the timber. The trees opened up ahead into a small clearing, maybe 60 yards across, where a fire had torn through 15 years back. Lodgepole pine saplings struggled up through blackened earth. And there, like an obscenity against the green, sat a white panel van, mud-splattered and dented, license plates removed. 3 men stood near the van's rear doors. 2 more were positioned at the clearing's edge, eyes scanning the forest with the twitchy paranoia of meth heads or criminals. Probably both. All 5 wore mismatched tactical gear, the kind you bought online from companies with names like Operator Elite or Tactical Response, mall ninja stuff. But the weapons weren't toys. AR-15 variants, at least 2 Glocks he could see, and one of them had a shotgun across his back. Mossberg, 12-gauge, pistol grip. The van's doors hung open. Inside he could see bundles wrapped in plastic. Lots of bundles. This wasn't a casual operation. He'd stumbled onto a drug transfer point. The kind of setup that moved product up from the border regions, through the forests into towns and cities, where suburban kids paid premium prices for poison. The kind of operation that left bodies in shallow graves when witnesses appeared. The smart play was to back out quietly, hike to his truck, drive to that P.O. box town, and make an anonymous call to the DEA. Let the professionals handle it. That was the smart play. But one of the men near the van was young. Couldn't be more than 19. Skinny kid with a teardrop tattoo that looked fresh, still red around the edges, the kind of tattoo you earned inside. The kid kept glancing at the forest with eyes that had seen too much too soon, eyes that would haunt him or harden him, depending on which way he broke. And that's when the old man saw the girl. She was maybe 16, duct tape across her mouth, hands zip-tied in front of her, sitting against a tree at the clearing's far edge. Her eyes were wide, tracking the men with the desperate calculation of prey measuring escape routes. Dirt on her face, blood on her torn shirt sleeve. She'd been running through this forest before they caught her. The smart play disappeared like smoke. He counted heartbeats, measured distances, calculated wind, though at this range inside 100 yards, wind was negligible. 5 men, 7 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber, 8 total. Room for error, 0. The positioning was wrong. 2 had clear lines of sight to his current position if he moved. The others would scatter the moment the first shot cracked out. This wasn't a shooting range. This was a dynamic, tactical problem with moving parts and lethal consequences. One mistake meant the girl died. One miscalculation meant a bullet found him instead. And if that happened, who would tell anyone about the girl taped to a tree in a clearing 17 miles from nowhere? Have you ever had to make a choice where every option led through violence? Where the only question was, how many people wouldn't walk out? Drop a comment if you've ever stared down bad odds and had to find the one thread that might unravel everything. He moved like water. That was the old training, the kind they didn't teach anymore because it required patience most modern operators didn't have. Weight on the balls of his feet, breathing through his nose, becoming part of the environment instead of moving through it. 20 yards, 15. The Remington came off his shoulder with the smooth economy of 10,000 repetitions. The first man to die never heard the shot. The .308 round took him center mass, punched through the knockoff plate carrier like it was cardboard, and dropped him instantly. By the time his body hit the ground, the old man had already worked the bolt, chambered the second round, and was tracking the next target. Modern combat is about speed and violence of action. The first 3 seconds of contact determine everything that follows. Hesitation gets you killed. Second-guessing gets you killed. The only thing that keeps you alive is commitment to the necessary. The second man spun toward the gunshot. AR-15 coming up, mouth opening to shout a warning. The .308 caught him in the throat. Not where the old man had aimed. He'd been tracking center mass again. But the man had turned at the last microsecond. The round severed the carotid and windpipe. The man went down gurgling, drowning in his own blood. Now the chaos started. The 3 remaining men scattered like quail. One dove behind the van. Another hit the dirt and started low-crawling toward the tree line. The third, the young one with the fresh teardrop tattoo, just froze, standing in the open. AR-15 dangling from its single-point sling, eyes wide, deer in headlights. The old man could have taken him, clean shot, kid wasn't moving. But something in those wide eyes, some flicker of absolute terror that hadn't yet calcified into the coldness required to survive this life, made him shift aim to the crawler instead. The third shot kicked up dirt 6 inches from the crawler's head. Intentional miss. Psychological warfare. Let them know someone out here could shoot, was choosing not to kill them instantly. Fear is a weapon sharper than any bullet. A scared man makes mistakes. A terrified man breaks. The crawler stopped moving. Pressed himself flat against the earth like he could somehow merge with it. Smart. He'd stay there until this resolved one way or another. The one behind the van was the problem. Professional, the way he'd moved, the way he'd immediately sought cover instead of panicking, marked him as someone with training, probably military, probably discharged under circumstances that wouldn't look good on paper. The kind of man who'd done violence before and had long since made peace with it. The old man shifted position. Movement. Always movement. A stationary sniper is a dead sniper. He flowed 15 yards to his right, keeping trees between himself and the van. The forest was his ally. These men were intruders. He was home. The professional behind the van knew the game. He wasn't popping up for a wild spray. He was waiting, calculating, trying to pinpoint muzzle flash or movement. Patient. That made him dangerous. The young one with the teardrop tattoo still hadn't moved, just standing there, shaking now. Visible tremors running through his skinny frame. Unarmed effectively. His rifle might as well have been a prop. The old man could have circled, come at the van from the far side, but that would take time. Time meant variables. Time meant the professional might find an angle on the girl, might decide a hostage improved his negotiating position. So instead, he did something stupid. He stepped out from behind the trees and walked toward the center of the clearing. Rifle up, eye to scope, tracking the van's rear corner where the professional had to be sheltering. Sometimes the boldest move is the one nobody expects. Sometimes you have to give them a shot at you to draw them out. Sometimes survival requires offering yourself as bait. The young one saw him first. Teardrop tattoo. Wide eyes getting wider. The kid's mouth worked, trying to form words that wouldn't come. His hands twitched toward the rifle he wasn't going to use. He wasn't a killer. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong choices compounding until he ended up in a forest clearing watching men die. The old man spoke for the first time. Voice rough from disuse and age and 10,000 cigarettes he'd quit smoking 20 years ago. Run. Just that. One word. Flat. Empty of threat or promise. An offering. The kid ran, crashed through the underbrush like a panicked deer. Gone in seconds. The sound of his flight faded into the forest's general ambience. That's when the professional made his move. He came around the van fast, AR-15 up and tracking, finding the old man standing in the open. For a frozen heartbeat, they looked at each other. Two men on opposite sides of a line drawn in blood and choices. The professional's eyes were cold, grey, calculating. He'd done the math. One shot. Old man with a bolt action versus full auto capability. The math looked good. His mistake was thinking math mattered. The old man's shot took him in the right shoulder. Not fatal, not immediately, but the .308 round shattered the shoulder joint, spun the man around, sent the AR-15 clattering into the dirt. The professional went down hard, came up trying to reach the Glock on his hip with his left hand. Awkward, painful, determined. The second shot ended it. Center mass. No hesitation. The professional fell back and didn't move again. Silence rushed back into the clearing like water filling a void. Somewhere high above, that raven called out again. The wind shifted, bringing the smell of cordite and copper and fear. The crawler still hadn't moved, face down in the dirt, hands visible, not reaching for anything. Smart man. Survivor's instinct kicking in. Sometimes the best tactical decision is surrender. The old man kept the rifle up, swept the clearing. 4 men down, 1 fled, 1 eating dirt and praying. He moved toward the girl, keeping the crawler in his peripheral vision. She was watching him with eyes that couldn't decide between hope and terror. The duct tape across her mouth had left red marks on her cheeks. Her wrists were raw from the zip ties. He pulled a knife from his belt, fixed blade. Ka-Bar. The kind of knife that had opened rations and cut paracord and done worse things when worse things were necessary. He sliced through the zip ties first. Her hands came free. She pulled the duct tape from her mouth herself, wincing as it tore away. "You hurt?" His voice still rough, still flat. She shook her head, then nodded, then shook her head again. Confusion, adrenaline, the crash coming. She'd break down soon. Let her. Trauma needed release. "Can you walk?" "I think so." Young voice, breaking at the edges, small-town accent, Oregon or Washington. "They killed my boyfriend. We were just camping. They came in the night and they—" "I know." He did. He'd seen variations of this story in a dozen countries. Innocents in the wrong place. Predators doing what predators do. The details changed. The pattern never did. "We need to move. There might be others." "Who are you?" Good question. He'd been asking himself that for 30 years. Once upon a time he'd had answers. Rank and serial number and a mission patch on his shoulder. Now he was just an old man who should have walked away from violence a long time ago and somehow never managed the trick. "Nobody," he said. "Nobody at all." The crawler spoke up, face still in the dirt, voice muffled. "She's right, man. Who the hell are you? You just smoked 4 guys like it was nothing. Military?" The old man looked at him. Really looked. Late 20s, neck tattoos, the kind of hard-earned scars that came from bad decisions in worse neighborhoods. But something in his voice, something almost like respect, the tone you used when you recognized someone who'd been to the deep end and come back. "Long time ago," the old man said. "Now I just want to be left alone." "Yeah, well, you're in the shit now, old-timer. You know what was in that van? You know whose product that is. They're going to come looking. They're going to find their guys dead. They're going to burn through this forest until they find who did it. Then tell them the truth." The old man gestured with the rifle. "Tell them it was a ghost. Tell them the forest took its due. Tell them whatever you want. But you're going to stand up, leave your weapons, and walk away, and you're never coming back here. This forest is closed for business." The crawler slowly pushed himself up, hands still visible, moving like he expected a bullet at any second. He looked at the bodies, at the van, at the old man, some calculation happening behind his eyes. Risk versus reward. Future consequences versus present survival. He chose survival. Picked a direction and walked, didn't run. Didn't look back, just walked into the trees and was gone. The old man turned to the girl. She was staring at the bodies with the fixed intensity of shock, trying to process, trying to understand how the last hour of her life had happened, how everything had gone from a camping trip with her boyfriend to this clearing soaked in blood and violence. "Your boyfriend," the old man said gently. "Where?" She pointed. "Northwest. Maybe 2 miles by the river. They shot him. He tried to fight them and they shot him." He nodded. Nothing to say to that. Death didn't care about courage or intentions. Death just was. There's a cabin, 17 miles east. Straight shot if you follow the old logging road. I'll take you there, you can rest. Use my radio to call for help. But we need to move now, before anyone else shows up. She nodded, stood on shaking legs, took one last look at the clearing, at the van full of poison, at the men who'd killed her boyfriend and would have killed her. Are you going to be in trouble? She asked. For what you did? The old man smiled. It wasn't a happy expression, more like the echo of something that used to be humor before the world burned it away. Trouble's relative, he said, been in worse. They left the clearing. The girl followed him through the forest. He moved with the same smooth efficiency that had carried him through jungles and deserts and mountains. Old body, old bones. But the muscle memory was still there. The training was still there. The part of him that was a weapon, that had always been a weapon, that would probably still be a weapon when they finally put him in the ground. Have you ever wondered what it takes to walk away from violence? Real violence, not the movie kind. It's not about the trigger pull or the confirmed kill. It's about everything that comes after. The weight you carry, the faces you remember, the knowledge that you've crossed lines most people don't even know exist. Drop a comment if you've ever had to make the hard choice. They walked for an hour in silence. The forest closed around them. The canopy filtered light into patterns. Birds called out territorial warnings. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled. That storm was coming in. Would wash away the tracks, hide the trail. Let the forest reclaim what had happened in that clearing. The old man's cabin appeared like a memory made solid, small, weathered. Solar panels on the roof, smoke coming from a chimney that had probably been burning since before he'd left that morning to hunt elk. Home, such as it was. Inside was sparse, functional. A cot, a table, shelves with canned goods, a radio setup that looked military surplus because it was, and on the wall, a shadow box. Inside it, medals he never looked at anymore, and a photograph of a younger man in uniform standing with other younger men, all of them smiling because they didn't yet know what was coming. The girl saw the medals, read them without speaking, understanding dawning in her eyes. Silver Star, Purple Heart. Others. The kind of decorations that told a story written in sacrifice and blood. You were a soldier, she said. I was a lot of things, he said, long time ago. He showed her the radio, explained how to use it, told her the frequencies for county sheriff and forest service, told her to give them coordinates. They'd come. It would take hours, but they'd come. What about you? She asked. I'll clean up the mess in that clearing. Make sure nobody else stumbles onto it, then I'll disappear. They'll look for you. They'll look for a ghost, he said, and ghosts don't leave tracks. She stared at him. This old man who'd appeared from nowhere and killed 4 men without hesitation and saved her life, and now wanted nothing except to vanish back into the forest, like he'd never existed at all. Thank you, she said. Inadequate words, insufficient for what had happened, but the only ones she had. He nodded, picked up his rifle, checked the magazine. 3 rounds left. Enough for cleanup. Enough for insurance if anyone else showed up. Enough for an old man who'd never stopped being a soldier, even after the uniform came off. Your boyfriend, he said, by the river. I'll make sure he's found. Make sure he gets home. Tears finally came then, breaking down the walls she'd built to survive the last few hours. She nodded, couldn't speak, didn't need to. The old man walked back out into the forest. Let the door close behind him. Let the cabin and the girl and the radio fade into the background. This was his element. Trees and shadows and silence. This was where he made sense. This was where the weapon he'd always been could still serve a purpose. The clearing was exactly as they'd left it. Bodies. Van. Product worth millions on the street. Evidence of a war most people never saw, fought by people nobody remembered. He gathered branches, dead wood, the kind of fuel that burned hot and fast, piled it around the van, opened the jerry cans in the back. Diesel. Perfect. Poured it over everything. Soaked the interior. Soaked the bodies. Made sure the whole clearing would light up like the 4th of July, struck a match, the kind that always worked, even in wind and rain. Old school, reliable, tossed it. The forest erupted in flame. Fire roared up with a sound like a living thing waking. Black smoke poured into the canopy. The van's tires exploded, windows shattered, the product inside cooked off with chemical colors. He walked away, didn't run, just walked. Let the fire do its work. Let the Forest Service and sheriffs and whoever else responded find a burned-out crime scene with no witnesses and no clear answers. By the time the first responders arrived, he was 10 miles away. By the time they started asking questions, he was 15 miles away. By the time they tried to piece together what happened, he was back in his cabin, the girl already picked up and safe, his rifle cleaned and put away, his medals gathering dust in their shadow box. That night, lying on his cot, listening to rain hammer the roof and thunder shake the walls, he thought about the young kid with the teardrop tattoo, the one he'd let run, wondered if the kid would learn anything from this, wondered if he'd go back to whatever life had put him in that clearing, or if maybe he'd find an exit ramp before it was too late. Probably not. Most people didn't. Most people rode the trajectory they'd started on until it ended badly. That was just the math of it. But maybe this once. Maybe the kid saw something in that clearing that scared him straight, saw what happened when you played at violence against someone who'd lived it, saw the difference between carrying a gun and knowing how to use it. Maybe. The old man closed his eyes. Let the rain lull him towards something like sleep. Tomorrow he'd go back out, track that elk, live his life in the spaces between violence, be the ghost the forest kept for itself. And if more men came looking, if the cartels or the syndicates or whoever owned that burned van sent people to find answers, well, the forest was deep, the trees were thick, and he'd been a ghost long before he'd ever come to these mountains. Let them come, let them try. The forest had its due, the forest had its ghost, and some lessons had to be learned in blood because no other currency would suffice. The rain fell. The thunder rolled. And somewhere in the darkness, an old soldier who'd never stopped being a weapon slept the light sleep of men who'd seen too much to ever rest easy again. But he slept, and the forest kept its secrets, and the girl made it home to bury her boyfriend and try to piece together a life after trauma. And somewhere, maybe a young kid with a fresh teardrop tattoo decided the life he was living wasn't worth dying for, maybe. The old man didn't believe in happy endings. Happy endings were fairy tales told to children. Real life was messy and violent, and the good guys didn't always win because most of the time there were no good guys, just people trying to survive and making the best of bad situations. But sometimes you stood in a clearing and made a choice. Sometimes you pulled a trigger. Sometimes you saved someone who couldn't save themselves. Sometimes that had to be enough. Out in the forest, where the Douglas firs grew tall and the rivers ran cold and the wilderness kept its own counsel, that was enough. That was all there was. That was everything. The ghost of the border, the old man in the cabin, the weapon that chose when and where and why to be used, still breathing, still watching, still waiting, because the forest always had need of ghosts, and some men were born to haunt the spaces between civilization and chaos. To stand the line that most people never even knew existed, to do the necessary things so others didn't have to. That was the job. That had always been the job. And until the day came when his body finally gave out or someone faster got lucky, it would remain the job. So if you ever find yourself deep in the Cascade Range, 17 miles from the nearest paved road, and you see an old cabin with smoke coming from the chimney, maybe you should just keep walking. Because the man who lives there doesn't want visitors, doesn't want questions, doesn't want anything except to be left alone with his memories and his choices. But if you're running from something evil, if you're prey being hunted by predators, if you need someone who understands that sometimes violence is the only answer to violence, well, maybe the ghost will hear you, maybe the forest will send help, maybe an old man with a rifle will appear from nowhere and remind the predators that they're not the apex after all. Maybe. The rain fell, the thunder rolled, and deep in the forest,